A new era of Raiders football will officially begin today with the introduction of the new GM and head coach. That plus more on Monday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 27th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you. If you're catching us wherever you find your favorite podcast, we appreciate that. Or if you're checking out the YouTube page, either way, it is good by us. We appreciate it. And the show continues to grow each and every day. Of course, the job that my man Ari does behind the scenes on the YouTube page is incredible. He makes that thing go. And that's the reason why we have over 17,000 subscriptions on the YouTube page, is because of my guy. So big shout out to my man Ari. Does a fantastic job each and every day. You want to hit him up, you can check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And if you want to hit the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line and be a part of the show, you can do that as well. 707-654-4693. And you can imagine, with no more speculating on who the new GM and new head coach are going to be, plenty of feedback that I received over the weekend. So we'll get all your calls. We'll get as many in as possible, right? Calls and texts. We'll close out the show. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Segment number 2, I want you to hear from a guy who played for the Raiders' new head coach, Pete Carroll. Played for him in Seattle. That's Nate Boyer, the former Green Beret. I got a lot of respect for Nate. Actually had a really good relationship with him going back to his time in Texas. But had an opportunity to have him on my radio show on Friday to talk about Pete Carroll and what he brings to the table as a coach from a player that was in that locker room. So you hear that conversation with Nate Boyer coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here in segment number 1, as you can imagine, news and notes of the day, and it's about the new GM and new head coach, John Spytek and Pete Carroll. We'll get into that conversation after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And Super Bowl 59, it's here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting with the FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. I'll tell you more about them later on in the show, but it is now official, like a referee's whistle, after a lot of different conversations that we've had here on the podcast. We've done a lot of deep diving into potential GMs, potential head coaches. The Raiders made it official on Friday and on Saturday that now John Spytek has a 5-year deal to be the new GM. He comes over from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the assistant general manager. Of course, we talked about that on Friday's show. We knew that it was official and he had signed his deal. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network had put that out, but the Raiders put a statement out on Friday. They made a little press release. So that became official. Then Saturday afternoon, it became official about Pete Carroll. We all expected Pete Carroll was going to be the guy, or at least most of us expected Pete Carroll was going to be the guy. And early on Friday morning, we found out, matter of fact, I think it was about 7:30, we found out from Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport, and others that Pete Carroll was, in fact, going to be the next head coach of the Silver and Black. So Pete Carroll gets a 3-year deal with a team option for 4. John Spytek has a 5-year deal. Those are all official. So Pete Carroll, at the age of 73, not that his age matters to me. By the time they kick off the first game in 2025, he'll be 74 years old. Again, the age doesn't matter to me. He's got more energy than me, you, and just about everybody I know. The dude is just a walking ball of energy. I wish I had the energy that Pete Carroll has, but he's got a 3-year deal, so it gives him an opportunity to get this thing turned around. And what I like about this hire is, as I've said many times, he knows what it looks like. He's been successful, and he's going to put the best 11 guys out there on the field on both sides of the ball. There's going to be a lot of competition. Matter of fact, when the Raiders actually put it out on their social media and they welcomed Pete Carroll as their next head coach, they said it's time to compete. And Pete was in capitals, so C-O-M in small letters, and then Pete in capitals, just because that is going to be the theme for Pete Carroll. Competition, competition, and more competition. There's no more guys on scholarships, right? There's no more guys that because they're a first-round draft pick or they're getting paid a lot of money, they have to play. That's done, right? Pete Carroll is not that guy. Pete Carroll is the guy that had that Seattle Seahawks team sign Matt Flynn to a big free agent contract as a quarterback. Then they went and drafted some dude named Russell Wilson in the 3rd round, and he beat out Matt Flynn. And that was game, set, match. And that's just who Pete Carroll is. So I'm excited about him. But think about this, right? A lot of people talked about his age. I was like, look, I'm not worried about the age. Let Let him get to year 3. Let him get to year 4 before we worry about what's next, right? There hasn't been just some long history of Raider coaches being successful more than a year, or even being employed more than a year or two. So let Pete Carroll to get to year 3. If he gets to year 3, I'm already feeling pretty good about the hire. But so I'm not worried about his age. I'm not worried about the length of the contract. But think about this. Pete Carroll has 181 career NFL wins, and this comes from Mike Sando from The Athletic. He does a fantastic job. 181 career NFL wins. That's the same as the Raiders' last 14 coaches combined. Antonio Pierce, 9. Josh McDaniels, 9. Rich Bisaccia, 7. Gruden 2.0, 22. Jack Del Rio, 25. Tony Sperano, rest in peace, 3. Dennis Allen, 8. Hugh Jackson, 8. Tom Cable, 17. Lane Kiffin, 5. Art Shell, 2.0, 2. Turner, 9. That's Norv Turner. And then Bill Callahan, 17. And obviously they lost the Super Bowl under Bill Callahan. And then Gruden 1.0, 40. So out of all those coaches, obviously Gruden was the most successful and coached the most games, but he has 62 wins. Pete Carroll has 181. And the Raiders' last 14 coaches combined have 181 career wins. So excited about what Pete Carroll could bring to the table. Him and the GM, John Spytek, are going to be introduced to the media this morning around 11 o'clock. Obviously, the Raiders stream it live, but you can also hear it on Raider Nation Radio 920. We'll play that live as well. That's before JT's show. JT's show starts at noon, but you can hear the press conference, and I'm expecting it to be a pretty lengthy one because both guys, General Manager John Spytek and head coach Pete Carroll, will both be introduced. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And, we've done a lot of deep diving on John Spytek and what he brings to the table. And what I'm excited about is the fact that he is so thorough when it comes to the draft. That is something that the Raiders just have not had a very good history, going all the way back to, when they started getting a GM, right? When Al Davis passed and Mark Davis hired Reggie McKenzie. And by the way, Reggie McKenzie just got a job with the Titans organization, and so did Dave Ziegler, just got a assistant GM job. And I know there's a lot of people that don't like Dave Ziegler, don't think that he did a very good job. I thought he did a pretty decent job, right? For what he was working with, I thought he did pretty good. Did he have misses? Absolutely. But everybody does. So he's an assistant GM in Tennessee. Big Reggie, he got a job with Tennessee as well. Both of those became official on Sunday. So I think that that's really cool. But all in all, there's been no GM that the Raiders have had where they've been successful consistently in the draft, whether it was Reggie McKenzie, Mike Mayock, Dave Ziegler, right, or even Tom Telesco. He got off to a good start, I thought, in this 1 year that he was with the Raiders, but he got 3 starters in Brock Bowers and JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, and also DJ Glaze, but now he's out. So consistent and having success in the draft is something that the Raiders are going to need to do if they're going to turn this bad boy around. I mean, the AFC West is no joke, and obviously we know who's going to be representing Super Bowl 59, and yeah, by the way, they come from the AFC West once again, as we'll see the Kansas City Chiefs and also the Philadelphia Eagles, another repeat of that. So they've got their work cut out for them to be a consistent competitor in the AFC West. But now you've got Andy Reid, you got Sean Payton, you got Jim Harbaugh, and you've got Pete Carroll. All those coaches will be in the Hall of Fame when it's all said and done, and they all compete now in the AFC West. So Pete Carroll's job is to get things turned around. People have hit me up and said, Q, who's he going to bring in as an OC and DC? I'm not too sure. We'll get to ask him some questions this morning and get to know a little bit more. I know that there's some people like Tashawn Reed and Vic Tafur from The Athletic that put some pieces out thinking this guy, that guy, just kind of connecting the dots. But I just kind of want to get his thoughts before I start speculating on who that he could bring in as a coordinator. The one thing I will say, once we saw what happened in Jacksonville with Liam Cohen eventually getting that job, that Friday was wild. From going from pulling your name out of the mix to all of a sudden putting your name back in the mix. Well, that leaves Patrick Graham on the outside looking in, right? Patrick Graham had an opportunity to be the Bengals defensive coordinator, didn't get that job, right? And then he was lined up to have a second interview with the Jacksonville Jaguars for their open head coaching spot that eventually went to Liam Cohen. So maybe Patrick Graham decides to return to the Raiders. Maybe Pete Carroll brings him back. I don't know, right? That's something that we'll ask him, obviously, this morning. We'll see what kind of answer we get. But Patrick Graham right now does not have a job, right? His contract ran out with the Raiders. I would like to see him come back. If that's something that Pete Carroll thinks would make a lot of sense. And maybe he's a successor to Pete Carroll 3-4 years down the road, if in fact that this is a successful hire for the Raiders and he's getting things turned around. Maybe that's the move that happens. I don't know. But that's really all that I could see. You know, Patrick Graham, Robbie Leonard, those are guys that were on the staff that I could see if they do like them. In fact, maybe they keep them around. There's also some thought that maybe Pete Carroll brings his sons. Brandon Carroll, he last coached with his dad from 2015 to 2020 as an assistant offensive line coach and run game coordinator for the Seahawks. But then this last year, he was in Washington with Jed Fish. So he was up there. So there could be a Brandon Carroll sighting in Las Vegas. Also, Nate Carroll. He's the current Carolina Panthers offensive pass game coordinator who first started with his dad in Seattle back in 2011 as a defensive assistant and then moved to the other side of the ball. So those are two guys that potentially could be in line to join Pete Carroll's staff. But again, we'll get a better idea of what he's thinking when we get to talk to him this morning at 11. Again, you can hear that. It'll be on Raider Nation Radio 920 live, 11 a.m. Pacific time. GM John Spytek and also Pete Carroll introduced to the media and introduced to Raider Nation. Real quick, another question that Pete Carroll's going to have and John Spytek's going to have is, well, what are you going to do with the quarterback position? Right? You got to have a quarterback to win in the National Football League. Here's Ian Rappaport from NFL Network on Pete Carroll being hired by the Raiders. And, well, here's one name that's being floated out there that could end up being in line to be the quarterback of the Silver and Black.
The Las Vegas Raiders have hired Pete Carroll, 73 years old, Super Bowl winning coach with the Seattle Seahawks and the Legion of Boom. He is now their head coach, going to be 74 by kickoff, but the gum-chewing grandfather, certainly one of the youngest 73-year-olds you could ever imagine, also faces a big decision at the quarterback position. The Raiders still need one. Keep an eye on this. One of his good friends is still Russell Wilson, the Steelers quarterback. My understanding is Russell Wilson wanted to play for the Raiders last year. Did not happen. Look for that union potentially to be discussed.
So, again, I don't know if that's going to be the direction. It's an easy connection to make. It's an easy, just point the finger and say, oh, that makes sense. Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, obviously they had a lot of success in Seattle together, had a falling out when Russell Wilson was traded from Seattle to Denver, but apparently they've mended those situations and those issues, and apparently they're cool now. And, of course, well, Russell Wilson is a free agent. So since he's a free agent and the Raiders wouldn't have to trade for him, if they were to bring him over on a one-year deal as like a bridge guy, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I don't know who's a better guy to go out there and get. People will say Sam Darnold. He's going to probably cost a lot of money. Some people say Justin Fields. I'm not convinced that he's actually a quarterback in the league. I think he's a hell of an athlete. Don't think he's really got that great arm talent, so I'm kind of shy away from Justin Fields. So I could see them signing Russell Wilson to a one-year deal, two-year deal as a bridge guy, especially if they feel like they're able to go and get a rookie quarterback in the draft. But again, those are questions that we'll start to ask later on this morning, John Spytek and Pete Carroll, when they meet with the media at 11 o'clock at the Intermountain Health Performance Center. So I look forward to that. But who is Pete Carroll as a head coach? Nate Boyer, former Green Beret, former Seattle Seahawk. He joined my radio show on Friday and really had a good breakdown of Pete Carroll, the head coach, and what he learned from Pete Carroll from his time in Seattle. You'll hear that conversation coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5, right? Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Job comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. So how does it work? Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pros tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. So right now, you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to continue doing a deep dive. This time, we don't have to do a deep dive on Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or Steve Spagnuolo or anyone else that could potentially be the head coach of the Silver and Black. Instead, we know exactly who the guy is. It's Pete Carroll, 73-year-old Pete Carroll, who will be 74. But again, I feel like he's the youngest 73-year-old that you're going to find, right? The dude's got so much energy. He's always chewing his gum. And word is he chews about 4 packs of gum per game, which is a lot. But hey, that's his thing. That's what he does. If you saw the Raiders' social media, their Twitter account, they welcomed in Pete Carroll, and all it was a picture of the indoor facility and a piece of gum. So you're going to see that. You're going to see that. in silver and black. So Nate Boyer joined my radio show on Friday, was able to reach out to him and say, hey, man, just come on the show and give me a little bit of background on who Pete Carroll is, what he brings to the table as a head coach. What is it like in that locker room? So here's Nate Boyer just responding to who he is and what he brings to the table as a head coach. What could you tell us about Pete Carroll, who he is, what he means to a locker room?
Oh, Pete's great, man. I mean, look, I think something that's super interesting about him is, well, first of all, when you show up there as a player, like, he's all about guys with a chip on their shoulder. That's why he gave me a shot, I was a 34-year-old rookie with not a lot of physical ability compared to a lot of folks. But, he knew I had some grit, and that meant something to him. And that's a lot of the players that he sort of helped cultivate in Seattle and building that championship team. But, where that all stems from was him, not doing it the right way the first time around. I mean, he was an NFL coach years ago before he went to USC and won those national championships. And he was high stress and, he didn't have fun. He didn't enjoy it. And, he'll tell you that. And he went back to college and he kind of changed his entire mindset. He got a lot more zen and just realized that, like, having this element of positivity, which often is, in coaching gets overlooked because it's like, oh, you got to browbeat the guys. You got to discipline. You got to be a disciplinarian. And there is of course, discipline matters in sports, but at the same time, there is a positive way to do that that's going to produce results from players and have them in a better headspace where they're competing because it's fun. You know what I mean? And they're not playing on their heels and worried about making a mistake so they get benched. They're attacking, and they feel confident. So it was cool. Like, at practice, the only kind of yelling that ever happened was, like, positive yelling. If somebody screwed up, that coach is going to take you to the side and tell you screwed up, and if you don't fix it, you're not going to play. It's that simple. There's no reason to, like, bash the guy in front of everybody. You know what I'm saying? And that's what really stuck out to me with Pete, was just the way that he handled the players in that way.
I love it. It sounds like a real positive environment, something that's going to get the most out of the players. But you said compete, and that's the C word I've been talking about throughout the course of the show is competition. Mm-hmm. How did he really just provide that competition where it didn't matter if you were a guy that was undrafted, drafted in the first round, just got paid a big deal as far as free agency? He just rolled the ball out there and allowed the best 11 to compete and be on the field.
That's exactly right. I mean, the best ones play. It didn't matter. To him and to the staff there. It's like, who is the most productive, period? I know we paid this guy that, and we only paid that guy this, but who's producing, and who do the other guys want to play next to? Who do they trust? Because that's a huge part of it. I mean, we had, there's a Legion of Boom, but also the Legion of Boom also stood for, the LOB also stood for Love Our Brothers, and it was all about the man on your left and right, much like in the military. It's like you're playing for that guy. And you're out there every day so that he can be successful. You're doing your job so that his job is easier. Like, that mentality is huge. And the always compete thing, before every team meeting, he would pick one guy from the offense, one guy from the defense, and it would be random guys. And they'd come up in front. We'd have a basketball hoop set up in the meeting room there. And they're basically playing knockout or some kind of, like, shooting game, right?
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's just silliness, but everything is a competition, and all those competitions can be enjoyable. They don't have to be this high stress thing all the time. And so it was just all about that, because that transfers over to position drills. You get into position drills. I remember watching the linebackers and watching, like, Brock Coyle, undrafted guy out of Montana, and then Bobby Wagner, the leader, middle linebacker on the defense at the time. And those two guys, like, jabbing each other, talking crap, competing on every little, kind of mundane position drill where it's just footwork, but they're competing on that and really messing with it. I mean, like, that, it makes you better because you're really pouring it into practice as well. You're not just, like, going through the motions. All right, when are we scrimmaging? I'm just trying to stay healthy till game day, whatever. You're out there, like, really getting work in because you're trying to win every little tiny drill.
I guarantee Max Crosby's going to love that. That sounds like something that's lined up for Max Crosby, competing at everything. I got to ask, Nate, who was the best hooper? Who in the competition was best at basketball?
Oh, man, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you this. The only year I had a chance to, play at all in the NFL was the year that the Seahawks signed Jimmy Graham. And so I'm gonna have to give it to Jimmy Graham because he could have played in the NBA too. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, he could have. He was a hell of a player. There's no doubt about that. Again, Nate Boyer, former Green Beret, former Seattle Seahawk, is with us here on Raider Nation Radio 920. A lot of pushback that I've seen and heard, Nate, is about the age of Pete Carroll. And I keep saying he's got more energy than me. What could you tell Raider Nation about the age of Pete Carroll?
He's the youngest guy in his 70s that anybody's ever met. Like, come on, man. He's running around practice throwing footballs for the DBs and for the receivers and stuff. Like, you know, that was just last year, right? Or 2 years ago, maybe. Like, he don't worry about that. Pete is young beyond his years, you know, and wise beyond him as well. So, I mean, I get it because, you know, whatever, oldest coach in the league, like, you're going to feel that way. And the trends right now, you know, all the trends with the young coaches and, you know, it's been the hot thing for the last decade or so. So I get it. But it doesn't really matter. That's not really where Raider Nation's at right now. I think it's a great move. I think it makes a ton of sense, in my opinion, you know. But, I mean, I'm biased, so.
Hey, look, I guess I'm biased too because it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's a great hire. His age to me doesn't matter at all. I think he's going to do some really good things, especially creating that culture, Nate, and that's something you've talked about. Obviously, it's something that matters in the military, having that strong winning culture. That's what Pete Carroll brings to the table, doesn't he?
100%. I mean, he's been there. He's won with multiple teams, and in both situations. Well, probably less so at USC because you know you're always going to have that talent. But when he got to Seattle, it's like I don't know if people thought you know that would be a championship team in a number of years, and it was relatively quick that happened. You know what I mean? And like you said, a lot of these guys, late rounders, undrafted. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it worked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they won. They almost won it twice. They should have won it twice.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you just gotta. That wasn't that long ago. That was a decade ago. You know what I mean? Like you got to keep that in mind. And even after that, you know, and you lose Russ and you lose all these guys, they're competing with Geno Smith and a whole new squad. Like. The only guy that was left was Tyler Lockett, I think, pretty much. They got all these new guys, and they're still competing. They're still in the playoffs. Still in the hunt every year. Like that's got to count for something.
It does. And, you know, one thing that really stood out to me, Nate, is the fact that how many year did he continue to lose coaches there in Seattle because they kept getting head coaching jobs across the league? Doesn't that mean something as well? Absolutely means something.
I mean, you know, DQ is one of those disciples, and Dan Quinn's a good friend, and coming up through that program, going on, you know, to Atlanta, getting that shot in the Super Bowl, losing that heartbreaker to the Patriots. But now he's out in Washington, and they're right there too. You know what I mean? In his first year, it's crazy. So like, and he's no spring chicken.
Right.
But like, you know, I mean, that stuff. It is part of that culture. I think Coach Quinn brings that same energy. I think he learned a lot from Pete and being on that staff and being around that. It's the same type of thing, man. Those guys are having fun. You want your coach to have fun. You know, you want him having a good time out there as well, and just believing. Like, and they genuinely do, and even when it doesn't look great, you know, and you're up against it. They still got that belief, and that's how you win those close games. It's got to be the leadership, not just the coaches, the players too. But if the coaches don't have that, the leaders on the field aren't going to have that either. If they're not going to have that belief either, you got that, you know, that any kind of sort of negativity or quit in that. On that sideline, like it's over. You feel it as a player. Like you just kind of know sometimes. It's really sad when you're in that moment. But I've been in games where we've been down 3 scores and felt like it's over. And I've been in games where we've been down 3 scores and the sideline, you just know we're in it. And then we come back and win. It happens, you know. So you got to have that. It's very important. It's a big part of it.
What do you think about this division now? Andy Reid, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, and Pete Carroll. And we know Pete Carroll and Jim Harbaugh already are rivals.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty exciting. It's cool. I mean, somebody's got to give the Chiefs a run here, all right?
Right.
You know? Come on. You know, we got to keep it interesting here. No, it's great. It's great. I mean, obviously the Chargers had a really good year. You know, and they're right back, and like the Raiders need to be there. I mean, you don't move cities, you don't make all these changes and do all these things unless, you know, you're intending on playing the last game of the season. And like, you know, it sucks. I mean, I think, you know, with Coach Pierce and everything, it's tough. Those things are tough. Like when it just doesn't work, you know, and you gotta move on. You gotta figure that out, especially when it's a former player and all this stuff. Same thing happened in New England, but you got to win. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to win, and the fans want that, and obviously the players want that. And so it's just what's got to happen, and you've got to. Yeah, and I think when you look at it from that regard, like the division you're in, with the experience of coaches and the championships that those coaches have won at various levels, like, yeah, I mean, it absolutely, makes sense that they all are sort of bringing in. The teams want to bring in people like Coach Carroll to compete with those other coaches who are kind of in that same legendary space, I guess, it would be the best way to put it.
Look, 181 career NFL wins. That's the same as the Raiders' last 14 coaches combined. So that tells you really all. Yeah, exactly. It tells you all you need to know. It made me say wow when I saw that earlier today. Well, Nate, we'll close out with this. If there's one single thing that you learned from your time with Pete Carroll, what would that have been?
I think that he believes in the possibility of anybody, making a play, like being the guy and being able to step up. Like he's going to build that 53-man roster or maintain it or whatever that is. But it's going to be 53 people that he absolutely believes if what hits the fan, like I can rely on these guys. And if I lose, if my entire secondary is decimated with injuries or whatever it is, like, I'll find the guys and I'll be able to instill that belief in them. So I just think that, and he's going to put a great staff around him too, and I think that's huge. I mean, I think, like I said, the city deserves it. The franchise deserves it. The players deserve it. It's a beautiful new stadium, and and it's all new and fresh and shiny. But how great would it be to see in year one, this team, going to the playoffs or just completely flip things around. It's absolutely possible. So I don't know. I just think, I think it's a great situation. I was surprised when I saw it myself. I was like, no way, he's back. I wasn't quite as surprised as when I saw Belichick take the UNC job, but I was still surprised.
That's the former Green Beret, Nate Boyer, talking to me on Friday on my radio show, talking all things Pete Carroll, what he brings to the table. I love that competition that he was talking about, playing basketball, playing knockout. I know that that's going to be something that's going to really get Max Crosby fired up, and he's a big name to watch, right? I mean, Max Crosby, we know that he's got a couple years still left on his deal, but he doesn't have any guaranteed money, so how much is that worth? What is that going to mean to John Spytek? What is that going to mean to Pete Carroll? With the kind of competition, the competitive nature that Max Crosby has, and the competition that Pete Carroll is going to bring to the table, I think that energy is going to just align perfectly. I think that you're going to really see a happy Max Crosby. Obviously, they got to work out the financials and see how much that means, but I just think that it's a really a perfect match. And John Spytek has been on the record that if you have good guys on the defensive line, you don't let them out the building. Right, so there's a lot to like about this pairing, right? The question is, how long is it going to take to really get this thing turned around? I don't believe that the Raiders are 1 year from being a big time competitor or a big time, even just like being in the mix to win the division. Let's put it like that, right? But you also saw what happened in Washington. They got their quarterback, they got their offensive coordinator, they got the right pieces in place, and they are one game away from the Super Bowl. So it's not like it can't happen, but I just think that they're, one really good, solid draft, free agency. The good thing is the Raiders have a lot of money and just really get this thing in the image of what they want to do. And John Spytek and Pete Carroll are obviously going to be tasked with that job. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Bob the Builder, and that's what I call Pete Carroll, how he puts this thing together. But what's on your mind? Your calls and texts are next. 707-654-4693. We'll close out the show hearing from you. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that is FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Right now, download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, the official partner of Super Bowl 59. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with Raider Al in Georgia. He's calling to talk about how difficult it is to be optimistic when it comes to the Raiders and then getting this thing turned around quickly. Here he is, Raider Al in Georgia.
Q, what's up, young bro? Raider Al. Long time. Just because I haven't been calling, that don't mean I haven't been listening. Q. Hard for me to be optimistic, brother. It is very hard. I'm going to keep listening and listening and listening, but maybe something will change my mind. But letdown after letdown after letdown, dude, it's a lot, brother. We all know, we all Raider fans. I'm actually 66 years old, getting ready to retire, hoping I see a championship before I leave this earth. I was lucky enough to be around to witness all 3 Super Bowls, but I know a lot of younger Raider fans have not. And they still sticking with the nation because that's how we do. Number 2, Pete Carroll. I'm like you, Q. Skins on the wall. I never really wanted Ben Johnson, but they was hyping him up so much, I was starting to think about it. But I wasn't a Ben Johnson fan. I'd rather have somebody that's been there, done that. Also, Q, I know it's a little early, but is there any free agents that you would sign that we could bring in? And also, who would you keep that's a free agent outside of Spillane? He's a no-brainer. I hope they don't let him go. Anybody else you would keep? All right, Q. Well, Happy New Year's to you. Happy New Year's to your family. And Happy New Year's to the Raider Nation. Raider Al. Out.
Raider Al, thanks for the call, man. It's great to hear from you. Like you said, it's been a minute, but it's great to hear from you. And, yeah, I know how difficult it is to keep the faith, right? The Raiders have let Raider Nation down time in and time again, right? There's been so many times where all of us have been pretty fired up and pretty excited about the opportunity that they look like they had in front of them. And for some reason, somehow, it doesn't come up the way that any of us wants to. I say it all the time. Players come and go. Coaches come and go. GMs come and go. All that happens, but Raider Nation is still here through everything, right? And it's just, I hate to say it's unfair because there's nothing fair about, professional sports, the NFL, none of that stuff. There's nothing fair. There's no way to just call it fair, but man, it just seems like it's such a raw deal, right? The Raider Nation goes through as much as they do, all the passion, all the energy, all the excitement, and just to come up short all the time, it's disappointing in a major way. So I totally understand exactly what you're talking about. As far as, Russell, I think Russell Wilson would get a call if he hasn't already from Pete Carroll. I think he could be a bridge guy, as talked about that in segment number 1. You heard from Ian Rappaport. I'm not real big on him, but I think he's going to get a look for sure. As far as Raider free agents go, Trayvon Merrick, Nate Hobbs, Malcolm Kuntz, Robert Spillane, all those guys I think deserve looks for sure. But we don't really know what they're going to run. And, if Patrick Graham were to return, like I suggested in segment number 1, then I think we have a better idea because the Raiders have so many free agents. They got like 27, 29 free agents. So there's going to be a lot of guys that can graduate and move on. There'll be some that stick around, but who fits with what this staff is going to want to do? And the question is, who else is going to be on the staff? Right? So that's the thing. So when they start to put this together and we start to get an idea, I think we have a better idea of who stays and who doesn't. But, I would look, like I said, I would look at Merrick. I would look at Hobbs, Kuntz, Spillane. I think they all deserve looks for sure and go from there. So thanks again for the call. I appreciate you. And like I said, man, it's good to hear from you. It's been a minute. Up next, got a text from Nick in the OC. Hey, Q, I think most GMs in the league are overrated. They just follow patterns and trends. For example, undervaluing running backs and not re-signing players such as Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, and Kareem Hunt. Raiders should have pivoted in the beginning of the season. Since we had no quarterback, we should have built 2-3 strong running backs and some veteran offensive linemen. Our strategy of following the league's trends is outdated, but we saved $29 million, LOL. Thanks and great show. That's Nick from the OC. And Nick, I don't think that GMs are overrated, and thank you for the text. I do appreciate it. I don't think GMs are overrated at all. I think that they're a key contributor to the building of the team, right? I mean, the head coach has a vision of what he wants it to look like. The GM is tasked with going out and getting the right players to fill that vision and fill that void. And obviously, like you mentioned, re-sign certain guys. I knew when Tom Telesco told us at the Combine that he didn't think the league was a one-back league anymore, that they weren't going to sign Josh Jacobs back. I just kind of knew it, that, okay, well, they're not going to pay big money. And I do think that that's a silly, lazy narrative when there's so many elite running backs, and Josh Jacobs, I believe, is one of them. Saquon Barkley is one of them. Derrick Henry is one of them. I don't really consider Austin Eckler, elite one. I don't really consider Kareem Hunt an elite one, but those other guys for sure. And you saw what they were able to do with their teams. Now, their teams are way better than the Raiders or the Giants or the Titans, right? I mean, they would have probably had successful years, but they wouldn't have had the year. Like Saquon Barkley is not going for 2,000 yards on the Giants. Right? I mean, they had a really good offensive line. They obviously have a really good quarterback play, really good offensive coordinator. So everything came together. But if you have one of those guys, you really don't want to let them go, right? But you're right. They did save money. And the good thing is, we all know Pete Carroll's going to want to run the rock, right? We do know that. This draft, if there's a draft where you wanted to get a running back, this is the one. There's like 30 or 40 dudes that are running backs that aren't all going to get drafted, but there are some fantastic dudes. Obviously, it's easy to talk about Ashton Genty and Cam Scatterboo, but Devin Neal from Kansas is one. I mean, there's so many, a couple from Ohio State. I mean, there's some dudes. I mean, some real, like, put your stones on the table dudes, right, that are going to come into the draft from the running back position. So if there's a year to go get your running back or two, this will be the one. So thanks so much for the text. Definitely appreciate you. Up next, got a call from T. Wolvie in Nashville. He's calling to talk about the Pete Carroll hire and what he thinks about potential assistant coaches. Here he is, T. Wolvie in Nashville.
T. Wolvie here in Nashville. Man, I swear, every time you get on the pod and go, by tomorrow morning, the news will probably break, it happens every time. So you got some Nostradamus stuff going on, so just keep willing things into existence. Anyway, just wanted to comment on Pete Carroll. I actually really like the hire. I know you were hemming and hawing on it earlier, but you warmed up to it. But honestly, it's kind of a legacy thing for him, because I really think it's probably something he puts his two sons in position to take over if things are successful. So I think he sees it for the long haul, and that, both his kids can get involved as well. So that's actually what I think is going to be the OC, and we'll take it from there. But those are my predictions, and whatever you got, I guess just say them on the air, because they're going to happen. All right, man. Raider Nation. Be good.
T-Wolf, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. It's funny how that happens, right? It really is. It's like, man, it didn't take too long. I remember recording the show and getting ready for Friday and saying, I don't know what time the announcement's going to be about Pete Carroll, if it's going to happen early in the morning, midday, maybe later in the afternoon. Then all of a sudden it's like, boom, first thing in the morning, all of a sudden, here we go, Pete Carroll. And my whole Friday got turned upside down. I had to record some little quick YouTube shorts for the Locked On Podcast Network. I had to jump on a couple different interviews. ESPN had me doing some things. Like it was a wild day. And the funny thing, and I didn't even talk about it yet in segment number one, is it's very rare that the Raiders make a hire and everyone's like, man, that was a fantastic hire. But that's what I heard a lot of on Friday after the Raiders hired Pete Carroll. A lot of people are excited about what he brings to the table because they know he knows how to do it right. And then later on in the evening, in classic Friday news dump, the Cowboys go and hire Brian Schottenheimer for their head coach. And that was such a Friday news dump. And Jerry Jones is a guy who loves attention. We all know that, right? Anytime him and the Cowboys could be in the news, he wants to do it. He dumped that news on Friday night just to let it be like, let me go and slide this thing out there. They had the laziest coaching search. And it's funny, when I heard people talk about it, like I'm listening nationally, I did my national show, game night that night. The more we were talking about it, the more people that we had on talking about it, they were just poo-pooing the way that they searched it. Like they didn't even really interview anyone. They interviewed Robert Saleh. They interviewed, who else? Oh, Leslie Frazier. They interviewed Kellen Moore. And then they interviewed Brian Schottenheimer, and that was it. And they had a conversation over the phone with Dion, but it wasn't an interview. That's all they interviewed. Like the Jets interviewed like 16 or 17 people. The Saints interviewed 14 or 15. Hell, they haven't even got their coach yet, but they interviewed all these different people. The Raiders did a really extensive search this time around. And all I could think of is when I'm talking about the Cowboys and the way that they didn't do a very good search was last year when the Raiders went with Antonio Pierce. And remember, I'm a guy that wanted them to go with Antonio Pierce. They didn't really interview anybody. It was just one of those, we're going to hire AP, so let's just interview a couple people and call it a day. I feel like, wow, like looking at it from that angle, it's like, wow, the Cowboys just did the same thing that the Raiders did a year ago. So I don't think it's going to be very successful. But T. Wolvie, thanks so much for that. Like I said, as far as, possible assistants, I don't really know. Maybe his sons, Brennan and Nate, they could be on the staff. But until we get a chance to talk to them today, really don't have a very good idea. But like I said, we'll try to pick his brain a little bit at the presser coming up at 11. Thanks so much for the call. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with a text from Lone Star Raider. What it do, Q? I'm so excited about the hire of Pete Carroll. I believe he's going to bring a winning culture back to the silver and black. However, the most important hire will be the Raiders' next OC. It doesn't matter who the head coach is if the Raiders hire another guy like Luke Getsy. I'm hearing names like Daryl Bevel and Shane Waldron. Do you think these are good candidates for the OC job? Lone Star Raider out. Lone Star, thanks for the text. I appreciate you. And yeah, I heard Bevel and Waldron kind of floated out there. That would not do it for me. To me, those are kind of on the same line and level of Luke Getsy. I don't think those are very good hires at all. And I really hope that that's not the direction that Pete Carroll goes. I do agree with you. The Raiders OC and their DC, for that matter, are going to be very important hires. I don't think Daryl Bevel or Shane Waldron is a good direction to go. I just don't. We'll see what Pete Carroll says. We'll see what direction he goes. But if those are going to be the two names, I don't think that's going to get anyone in Raider Nation very excited because, well, what they did wasn't very good. There's a reason why they both got fired from their respective positions. So, the Raiders fired Luke Getsy, but the Bears fired Shane Waldron as well. Shane Waldron was the guy that replaced Luke Getsy in Chicago. So, and Daryl Bevel, he's not much better, and he's been shown the door before as well. So, again, that doesn't do anything for me. I hope that's not the direction that they go, but we'll start to find out, and they'll start to put the pieces together as officially John Spytek, the GM, and Pete Carroll, the head coach, start the new era of Raiders football. I'm sure they're already busy. I'm sure they've been busy all weekend long, but it'll be official at 11 o'clock when they meet with the media and get introduced to Raider Nation. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Got a call from Sacktown Mark and a text from Mike True in the 562. We'll get that tomorrow. We'll obviously react to the press conference that we'll hear today. We'll have some sound bites from that. We'll bring some more to the table as well, do some more deep diving into these guys. And again, it's a new era of Raider football, another new era of Raider football. Since I've been here in Las Vegas, John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia, Josh McDaniels, Antonio Pierce, and now Pete Carroll are the head coaches. Way too much. That rotating door has got to stop. Hopefully this is the new version that will make that go and have a consistency a lot longer. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.